Okay, we're going to get started with our last session. We're so glad we have Richard, I'm going to do it right, Stup. Dr. Richard Stup is the Ag Workforce Specialist with Cornell University's College of Ag and Life Sciences and Cornell Cooperative Extension. Before joining Cornell, Richard founded Ag Workforce Development, a firm focused on improving individual and team performance through organization development and technology solutions. Early in his career, Richard was an extension specialist with Penn State University, where he led the Dairy Alliance team. He earned his doctorate from Penn State in the field of workforce education and development, including innovative research into the effects of human resource management on employee organizational commitment. We're so pleased that Richard could join us today. And so I'll let you get started.
All right.
I guess everything is set up. Yeah. Here's the, you're using this, right? There you go.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
How's everybody doing? Good. Good. All right. So has anybody heard of the labor changes that have come down the road? Yeah. Okay. That's why you're here, right? Not headed out. Yeah, there's been a whole lot of interest, and there's a whole lot of change going on, and that's actually one of the themes that I want to talk about here. Does it have to be pointed at a certain spot? Or? No. Try it. No, I know what you need to be clicking on. You need to click on that screen. Just close that one out. Yep. Or, well, no, you don't want to do that. Just minimize it. Yeah, that's it. Now, cancel that. Yeah, click on that. There you go. Yeah, that's very good. Thank you. So, yeah, a couple disclaimers before I jump into it. So, I'm not a lawyer. I can't give you legal advice. I will answer questions, as we go, and then at the end, as much as you want. There does get to be a point where I have to say, I can't answer that for you, either because I just don't know, or it's because it's going to be very specific for you. And there comes a level of risk there that you need to manage, and you really have to have an attorney at that point to help you work through that. And that when you're talking about legal, or if you are dealing with an attorney, you have a question that comes up around some of these labor or human resource issues. It's not just the guy that closed the last real estate mortgage for you, right? There needs to be somebody that has labor as part of their practice area so that they understand these laws. So just be aware of that. And sometimes that's not the country lawyer. Sometimes they're not out there. You have to go to a more, a city or town, a city somewhere to find someone that does labor practice. So everything here is for education and discussion purposes. Now I'm going to give you a little bit on the content disclaimer. We've got an hour here. There's a whole lot, and I can't get into everything in an hour, but I want to kind of give you an overview so you know what some of the most important things are for your business, so you know what to follow up on. And you've got the handout there. There's a ton of web links in there to help you get some of the right information. So that's what I'm going to try to do for you. The other thing about it is that this stuff has been changing a lot. And now there was a lawsuit right here at the end of the year which changed some things some more. And we don't know. There's going to be a hearing on January 24th. We don't know how some aspects of it are going to shake out. The law passed back in July, got signed by the governor back in July. And the state agencies have been working with the ag industry to try to sort some of these things out and answer some questions. But they frankly didn't do that good of a job with it. And they weren't real clear on a lot of the answers, and that's partly why there's a lawsuit. So some of those questions that the industry kept asking, you need to tell us how this is going to be, how it's going to work. What do farms need to do in order to comply? And those answers just didn't come through. So that was what some of the challenge really was here. So it's not all clear now, and some of it may not be clear for years because it may take some lawsuits to kind of sort this stuff out. But most changes went into effect January 1. I write about it all the time. That's our website up there, agworkforce.cal.cornell.edu. You can go on there. You can also subscribe. I know Mary has been putting a lot of the articles out through other publications. So I encourage you, just stay tuned, plug into Farm Bureau and Extension and DFA and whoever else is, and Farm Care Needs, whoever else is putting information out for that. This is not a good option. Okay, because these changes, if you have employees, these changes will affect you. So nobody can stick their head in the sand on this one, and the consequences are too high. You know, if you go and you're simply violating labor laws and you try to plead ignorance about it, when either you're getting in the process of being fined or you're being sued by an employer or something like that. If you haven't, as an employer, if you haven't followed the rules, if you haven't documented your actions and things like that, you're going to lose because that's the standard. You know, employers need to document what's happening, and they need to understand the laws and make good faith efforts. Not to say that you're not going to make a mistake here and there. Everyone does, but you need to be making a good faith effort. So this is not a good strategy. So we'll talk a little bit of the background on how we got here, because it's important to understand a little bit of the context of it. And also have to talk about some of the federal and state laws, because it doesn't make sense unless you understand both a little bit. We'll talk about the insurances. In a lot of ways, that's kind of the easier piece for us to deal with. But then we'll jump into overtime, day of rest, a little bit on union formation and collective bargaining. I think by and large we have smaller farms here with smaller workforces. So I don't think you'll have as much of a challenge from unions as you might have with larger farms with large workforces. And we won't get into seasonal housing inspections at all, partly because that's the one piece that is January 1, 2021. So we've got another year to deal with that issue. And then we'll try to answer some questions. There is this lawsuit, and I'll share, there's a lot of confusion on what the lawsuit means, but I'll share a couple of slides, what it does mean and how it affects the laws right now. All right, a little bit of the background. We are in New York, and New York has really in a lot of ways led the implementation of labor laws for 100 years. And those labor laws have had an impact not just across the United States, but really across the world. And there was an event called the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. That was a sewing factory in New York City. It was absolutely horrific fire that took place there. 600 immigrant, mainly women, that worked in that facility. Of course, back in those days, 1911, they didn't have the safety rules and requirements that we have today. But the fire broke out. The elevator failed. One of the escape doors, one of the doors was closed or locked from the outside, so that people couldn't get out of the building. And obviously, it was so horrific. It is the event that led to the beginning of a lot of the labor regulations and safety regulations that we have today, and it still influences. If you go to any labor class talk on the campuses, universities, they're going to talk about this as one of the original events that they got the labor movement moving. But just understand that's where we are, and this happened in New York City. Here's another one. This is, well, let me start getting into then some of the laws. So the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938, underlined federal, so this is national law, not state law, came about in the Great Depression. You see that picture on the right-hand side there. What do you see there? Yeah, how old are those kids? 2 boys there. Yeah, something like that. But they're hard at work on some kind of a loom, it looks like to me there. What does that thing look dangerous? Yeah, and those little boys just standing right up. Well, no wonder the injuries did happen. And people killed and all kinds of things going on in those days. That was not uncommon. So that's where we've come from, right? We don't see that today, and so that's part of the good thing of some of these labor laws that have corrected a lot of these situations that we would just not put up with today. But out of the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938, again, a very, very leading edge federal level law. We got minimum wage, we got overtime, employer record keeping requirements, child labor, and importantly, in that period of time, farm labor was exempted in the federal law. Why do you think that was?
Most of it was family.
Yeah, it was families, it was small farms, right, spread out over the countryside. It just didn't fit this kind of industrial model of labor that was taking place in the more urban areas and that sort of thing. So that's part of why it was exempted. I know you hear from people that were labor advocates, you hear all kinds of things about why, and they have different reasons. They talk about racism and things like that. This was part of it. It just didn't make sense for agricultural labor. Let's look at overtime. Anybody know why? What was a big driver for overtime? Why that was put into play? Overtime being, after you work today, it's 40 hours, right? For most jobs, hours over 40 are overtime for most industries. So remember, it's 1938. What's going on? The Great Depression, right? So that meant unemployment was way high, right? Overtime came in. What were they trying to accomplish with overtime? Were they trying to give people more money?
No, hire more people, so they didn't pay over.
You got it. Spread the wealth, hire more people, because people had jobs. In fact, unemployment was like 35% for, it went up and down, but that was common in the Great Depression, which meant that whatever, 65, 70% of people did have jobs. And a lot of those folks were working lots and lots of hours, 60, 70, 80 hours a week, right? Or maybe even more in some of those factory settings. The government's policy there with overtime was to encourage employers to hire more people, right? Work some people less hours, so they had to create more jobs for more people so that, a higher percentage of the population could be employed, could have jobs. Did it work? Absolutely, it works. So overtime, that is the original intent of overtime, was to drive it, because employers don't want to pay time and a half. They never have. If they have any option at all, they never do. But the whole point was to spread out employment and to a wider sector of the population. So that's just another thing to understand about it. Federal Fair Labor Standards Act does not include farm workers today. Federal level, farm workers are still out of the Fair Labor Standards Act. Okay, another federal law, the National Labor Relations Act. This is the union law at the federal level. It gives most employees the right to join or form unions, engage in protected activities, all that stuff. Agricultural and domestic workers, still excluded from that law. So at the federal level, there are no farm unions. So the union law that we have is only for New York. That's important to remember, okay? Because it comes into how it's going to be regulated going forward. So this is just a state law, federal law, there are no farm unions. However, the agency that is going to regulate farm unions in New York does use federal law as guidance. They have to. That's where most unions are regulated by the federal the agency is small, but at the federal level, most unions are regulated there, not at the state level. Okay, so we had legislation passed in 2019 after a 40-year battle with New York. And some of you, I've only been in New York working in New York for 2 years, but some of you have been part of that battle for a long time. And worker advocates and elected reps were pushing for it for many, many years to get these things overtime, collective bargaining, and other ways. We had an election in 2018. That changed the Senate to be Democratic, and that's what allowed the bill to be passed for the first time in many decades. There were Senate hearings that took place in 2019. The farm industry organized. They had this Grow New York campaign. You may have seen that logo there on the left. There were hearings. That's one of them there in the middle. I think that was actually Sullivan County. And then ultimately, the bill did pass. after some compromise, and some of the compromises were overtime is at 60 hours, right? It's not at 40 hours. We'll talk about that more in some details. But did the advocates group, did they want it to be at 60 hours? No, they wanted it to be at 40 hours. So the folks that were pushing for the bill, that was a big compromise for them, was to let it be at 60 hours. We'll talk about that more in some details. But that's how we got to this point. And I'll talk about a couple more of those compromises that were in there. So if you want to read more about it, there's a couple of links to it. I will tell you that just reading the text of the bill won't quite tell you everything, because there's some definitions that changed in there that affected other parts of the law, which is really, really important. So it's not all in the bill itself. But these are a couple of really important links. Department of Labor has put some information out there, and this takes you directly to that middle link. And then that's a fact sheet at the bottom that they've put out, which for the most part are still accurate today. We'll talk about some of the exceptions. Everybody, if you have farm employees, you need to have a pay notice and work agreement. And that's not a new thing. That's been around for years now. But make sure that you have that in place for your employees. This is where you can go to. It's called the Form LS 309. You don't have to use Department of Labor's form. They just provide that for agriculture to use if you want to. It is totally revised it was like a month ago. They put the new form up, or actually it was just a few weeks ago. And if you use your own form, just make sure you cover everything that's in the New York form. Okay. But LS 309, make sure you get that in place. And if you haven't already, you want to revise yours for the new context, for the 60-hour overtime and that sort of thing, and also for the day of rest, which we'll talk about. So that's kind of that's a take-home for you. Update your work agreements if you haven't done so already. And I just encourage you, don't put your farm employee or your federal employer ID number on there. It calls for it. It's not needed.
Is this all applied to salary and hourly?
This all applies to salary and hourly employees. Yes, and we'll get to that in a minute, because if I don't get to ask me again about salary, because some folks were trying to use a strategy of paying people salary in order to avoid paying overtime, and that really doesn't work. So we'll talk about that. If I don't, please remind me or ask me. So yes, update your work agreements. Okay, let's jump into the insurance part of it, because a lot of ways this is the easiest part, because it's pretty straightforward and it's not all in turmoil right now. But just because I go fairly quickly through the insurance part, don't get the idea that it's not important, because you absolutely need to get these insurances in place. It's probably the most or the least painful part of the changes, but you need to make sure you do it anyway. So disability, paid family leave, and so forth. Here's one of those things where if you read the law, you might have missed this, as I did, because it changed the definition of who an employee is right there. So let's see. Term employee shall also include farm laborers. That was an edit that they put into another segment of the law. And because farm employers are now regular employers, so you used to be separate from all the other employers in the state. Now you're not. Now you are the same as other employers all around. That means that some of these insurances came in place. So things like disability and paid family leave were already required for other industries. It's just now required in agriculture also. So that's where we are by that definition change. Disability insurance. So just a little bit about what that is. Provides coverage for off-the-job injury if somebody gets hurt. So what provides coverage for on-the-job? Workers' comp. Yeah, so that's the same as it's always been. This disability insurance is required if somebody gets hurt, doing whatever off the job. It will provide some coverage. It is required for virtually all employees, both full and part-time. You can go. I'm going to refer to their websites because the insurance websites are actually quite good. So do go to them and follow up to get a lot of detailed information. They've done a good job with it. You can deduct from employee paychecks, and I've been getting a number of questions lately about payroll. So with payroll, you need to make sure, just a couple of big picture ideas, but with payroll, you need to make sure, first of all, that you have the gross wages, the hours, and the amount that you're paying calculated kind of at the top of your pay stub, and make sure that that's above minimum wage. And then after you do that at the top of the pay stub, then you start with your deductions that are allowed, including these insurance deductions. Okay? Make sure you can document minimum wage at the top of the pay stub, and then do some deductions. That's just a key point that people miss a lot. But you can deduct for disability, and you can get this from, usually from most of your insurance carriers that you use already. They've got disability and they've got paid family leave in most cases. Some people do use the state's New York State Insurance Fund. It also has both of these insurances, so you can go to them to get that as well. We were kind of concerned when it first came out, how much is this going to cost? It's around $2 to $5 per employee per month. So again, you can deduct from your employees if you want, or you can pay it yourself. Employers are making various choices around that. Some are just paying it upfront, but at least this is not hugely expensive. It's not too bad. It probably, again, is one of the less painful parts of the changes. But I did want to throw this in. I'm not going to read through those for you, but the penalties are pretty severe for not having disability. So don't mess around with that. Get the disability insurance. It's not terribly expensive. Get it and get it in place. It's required for all those employees. And don't put yourself in a position where you might get penalized. Let's look at paid family leave. So again, this is in place already for other parts of the industry or other parts of other industries. It's new for us in agriculture, but the benefits that an employee would get if they went out on paid family leave, about 60% wage benefits are covered for up to 10 weeks of leave. And they can either take that all at once, 10 straight weeks, or they can take, let's say they're taking 3 days a week for a longer period of time. It's typically for maternity leave or paternity leave. Fathers can also go on leave, or to take care of a loved one or someone that has an illness or sickness or injury or something like that. That's typically what paid family leave is for. For the employee, it gives you the opportunity to return to that same job that you left, or a very similar job. Continuation of health insurance and no discrimination. So that's, from a employer standpoint, be sure to not discriminate against any employee that uses paid family leave. You do have to qualify for it. You have to, work for a private employer, which includes farm employers. Meet the time work requirements, which is 26 consecutive weeks, or 20 or more hours after 26 consecutive weeks of employment. So there's some employers in the state, especially seasonal employers, who may have HOA workers or even just some other migrant workers who might not meet that 26-week requirement. In that case, they can get a waiver for paid family leave because they're just not going to qualify for it. They're not going to work the 26 weeks in a year. So that's possible, but most of the year-round employees, they are going to qualify for that. Part-time people can also qualify, as it says up there. That website on the bottom, paid family leave, is good. It explains a lot. Let's look at it a little bit from the employer standpoint. So it's usually sold as a rider on a disability. So when you're getting your disability, you get your paid family leave at the same time. Usually just sold, as part of that. You can also deduct for the paid family leave from employees. Don't pay for that. But here's the kicker, the third bullet point there is that, so you're operating your business, right? And you got your key employee, and oh wow, it's May, and they're having a child born, and they need to take 10 weeks off. Ouch. Yeah. So that, I think, is the big thing that employers need to be talking to employees with and planning for is, how am I going to do that? How am I going to cover those 10 weeks that my employee's going to be gone? And what am I going to bring somebody in to hire them to work for 10 weeks? By the time I get them trained, then they'll be gone, And so who's going to want to do that? So you need to think those through. I mean, if you're a large employer, that's not as hard. But for a small employer, you've got 3 employees, and the key one leaves. This is a pretty heavy burden, but it's what we have. So I just want you to be thinking ahead of that. I don't have any easy answers. There's not any easy answers on that, but you'll need to come up with a strategy for how to deal with that. Last point, though, again, if you get stuck in one of those situations, please don't discriminate against employees for requesting PFL or using it. You got to work with them on that. This is a right that they have, at this point. You don't want to be on the wrong side of that law and have a lawsuit brought against you from an employee for paid family leave. Yes.
So if you, something happened, you had 3 employees and 2 of them wanted to go out. EFL.
Wow.
There's no contingency there. Or 3, I mean, again, probably 3 wouldn't, but.
Yeah, not within the law. No, there's nothing that says, you know, an employer can't have 3 go out one time. No, there's no contingency. That's what I'm saying. You know, you're gonna want to talk with your employees and have that kind of relationship where it's like, look, guys, you know, if you all leave, I pretty much got to shut the doors or something, you know, and I can't provide your job to come back to. So let's talk and try to figure things out. You know, I'm certainly going to support you and help you to do this, but we need to have a plan. So that's, I guess that's how you share it. Yes.
Is it like one-off case by case on how much leave time one has to report that they need them to pay for? Like, say I need them to leave, how long they get for recognize?
That's a great question. On the top of my head, I don't know the answer. I would encourage you to go to that website.
But it's statement static, it's not different.
Oh no, it's going to be the same for different organizations. That's a good question. I'm not sure if there is a requirement for leave time in there.
Is this new for this year?
For agriculture, yes. Again, other industries have it already. So disability paid family leave, go get them if you haven't already. You need to have it in place. Workers' comp. This is kind of the easy one, really, because most of you, if you've got employees, you already had workers' comp. Some of you this may affect, because all this did, I know the people that passed this law have been trumpeting it and saying how, you read the newspaper and saying how farm employees are getting workers' comp for the first time. All it did was remove the small farm exemption. It used to be that you had to pay at least $1,200, or no, if you were under $1,200 per year in payroll, then you didn't have to get workers' comp. All this did was take that $1,200 threshold. So now everybody has to provide workers' comp. That's really the only change that came from the workers' comp. Yeah, there are some poster requirements yet, so that's maybe a slight change there. That's another take home that I didn't put in a presentation here. The posters did change. You know, the employment posters you're supposed to have in a break room or somewhere. There's several changes in there for 2019, so please download those from Department of Labor's website, which is the easiest place to get them, and post those, because those definitely did change. That toolkit there is a great resource, and they're very, very clear about that. So you can go to that website. Unemployment, same deal here. There was a reduction in the threshold, and so now more employers now need to have the small farm exemption was taken out, so more employers need to provide unemployment insurance. Overtime, day of rest, and the wage board. So that gets into some of the other issues that are really more challenging for the industry. So some of you may have gotten to the road shows back in November. And at that time, we had the best information that we could. Department of Labor was still changing some things, and in fact, we did the road show from Monday to Friday across New York, and stuff changed from Monday to Friday, which made it pretty hard to do education when it's that fluid. But at that time, one of the real challenging things was that, okay, so there's two things. There's overtime and there's the day of rest requirements that talk about a calendar week. At that in the law. And at that time, the Department of Labor was interpreting a calendar week as a calendar, right? Sunday through Saturday is a calendar week. And that's what the Department of Labor was saying. Well, okay, but what if you pay people on a payroll week that goes from Tuesday to Monday, or whatever yours is? It might be different than a calendar week, which a lot of people do, right? You would have had to keep track of the 60 hours during the calendar week separately from the 60-hour tracking that you might do in your payroll week. Are you with me on that? And the day of rest is one 24-hour period within a calendar week. if your payroll had been at a different time, you would have had to keep track of that separately. And for some people, maybe it wouldn't have been a big deal for just a few people, but if you have a lot of employees, it was going to be a disaster trying to track that. So the Department of Labor would say everybody needs to switch their payroll week to Sunday through Saturday. Well, we talked with them and really worked that around, and there was a lot of back and forth between industry and labor, and they relented on that. They backed off of the whole calendar week, and they said employers can designate exactly what their calendar week will be. So my suggestion to you is make your calendar week the same as your payroll week, okay? Whatever that is, right? So you only have to track 1 week that you're dealing with. So don't get 2 separate weeks. It'll make our life a whole lot easier. So in your work agreements, like I said, you have to update those work agreements. This is one of the things you need to put in there. What is your payroll week / calendar week? Okay, so you need to update that and get that clearly in there. But that was a big victory, I think, that the industry got, was to get away from that very rigid calendar. One thing I do want to show you, and because I have this up here real quickly. So we'll talk about day of rest in a few slides here, but remember, one of the provisions is that there has to be 24 consecutive hours period for a day of rest, right? During every calendar week. There's one thing that's a little tricky still here, is that what if your day of rest, that 24-hour period for that person, starts at 6 o'clock on this Monday and goes to 6 o'clock over here on this Tuesday?
Things are gonna work at night.
No, day of rest, because they're sleeping 24 hours, right?
It won't show.
It's in 2 pay periods now, isn't it? So you got to be aware that sticker is still in there. So whatever your day of rest, whatever your week is, you need to be careful about days of rest that go over it, because it needs to be a 24-hour period within your calendar week. I know it doesn't make a lot of common sense, right? But the law doesn't often make much common sense. Okay. So for purposes of compliance with the overtime, this comes from the Department of Labor. Current calendar week will be an established, recurring, consecutive 7 days designated by the employer. Calendar week should not be changed from week to week. Okay, so you can have different calendar weeks for different groups of employees. So if you've got a dairy farm, and for whatever reason you need the milkers to be on this calendar week, and you need the field people to be on a different calendar week, you can do that. What you can't do is be changing on a regular basis. They don't want that. They don't want people having some kind of a scheme where their calendar week is this frame this week and that frame that week. They want to stay the same, but you can't have it different for different people. Okay, let's talk about overtime and how that works. So the law established an overtime threshold at 60 hours. So you can work up to 60 hours in any given calendar week, which we just talked about. And any hours over 60, 2 things. 1, they have to agree to work over 60. You can't make them work over 60. And 2, if they work over 60, they have to be paid at 1.5 times their regular rate of pay. So what we're trying to get to with the work agreement, we're trying to get to the understanding with the Department of Labor that if you spell out in the work agreement that the employee agrees to work over 60 hours, we're trying to get it so that that work agreement can be the documentation you need for that whole year or for going forward. But they haven't said that that's definitely the way it's going to be yet. At this point, it could be that you need an agreement and you need to document that agreement every single week with employees if they're working over 60 hours a week. I see the faces in the room. I understand. That's why we're trying to get on the work agreement, because that would be kind of crazy to have to document every single week. But it's when it is that way, which it hopefully will be, we'll let you know as that comes a little bit clearer. But we just don't know for sure on that what they're going to decide. Another key point here is that it's not just the hourly rate; it is the regular rate. Okay, I have to explain that a little bit. So if someone makes $12 an hour, I'll use another dairy example here. Somebody makes $12 an hour, but you've got a milk quality incentive plan in place that says if they hit certain snack cell count, that they're going to get this much more every month. And if you divide that extra bonus over the hours that they work, it comes up to $1 an hour or something, you know, whatever it comes up. That is a, now that would be called a non-discretionary bonus. In other words, you've got an agreement in place already, so you're not deciding every month whether or not to give them that. It's kind of an agreement in place already. So that becomes non-discretionary and has to be part of the regular rates right here. So now, so instead of just the $12 an hour times time and a half, which would be 18, it would have to be $13 an hour times time and a half, which would be 19.50. So in other words, that's going to drive most employers to not want to have non-discretionary bonuses, right? So some of the details on that, people tended to be moving away from no quality bonuses anyway. But if you still have one, be aware of that. You may be able to, you know, document that this is totally discretionary. We'll talk about that in a minute, but well, actually, I'll move forward to the next slide. So discretionary versus non-discretionary. So if you give a Christmas gift to cash, and it's totally at your discretion as an employer whether or not anybody's going to get that and how much it's going to be, then that is discretionary. It doesn't have to be included in the regular rate of pay. It is not going to affect the overtime, okay? But if you have that no quality incentive and it's non-discretionary, then you have to include it in that calculation. So you may be able to, document some of those things if you really want to continue that and have to be real clear that each month that is totally discretionary, totally up to the employer about how much they're going to pay. It is not directly connected to milk quality and things like that. You may be able to set that up. And as that comes a little bit clearer, we'll be communicating a bit more about that. But I just want to communicate this whole discretionary versus non-discretionary idea. And just get you thinking that, you know, things that are strictly a gift and not connected directly to performance, I can probably do that and not have to worry about overtime. But if it's connected to performance and the employee can begin to predict how much they might get paid for that extra pay, then it's going to have to be counted into overtime. Another thing that gets into this is, okay, most people, if they have employees that they provide housing for, most people provide it at no cost, right? But there is a value, of course, to that housing. There are people out there, though, that give a housing allowance. So they'll give $100 towards someone's housing as cash in the paycheck. Unfortunately, that is non-discretionary income. It has to be included as in the regular rate of pay, and it will drive up overtime. That's another area that it's not uncommon that comes up. Are we all clear on that? Good, because I'm not. All right. Who's covered by overtime? So most farm employees included in the overtime provision, including farm desk workers, including H-2A workers that might come into the situation. Interns and apprentices, that came up pretty clearly. There's a lot of smaller farms that are using interns of some type, but those folks are doing farm work and they are included in overtime. Here's the salary point. So simply paying by salary doesn't eliminate overtime. So you can pay anybody you want by salary. All salary means is that I'm paying you X amount of dollars in the same amount, the same lump sum amount, and I'm paying it, you know, every week or every month or whatever it is. That's what salary pay means. It doesn't mean you're exempt. So you can have a milker that you're paying whatever, $3,000 a month, and you know, they work for you whatever number of hours they work for you, and you're paying $3,000 a month for that work. That doesn't exempt you from overtime, and it doesn't exempt you from minimum wage or any of those sort of things. You are required still to track those hours that employee works, because they would be eligible for overtime. Track those hours and make sure first that they're over minimum wage, and second that they haven't exceeded 60 hours in any calendar weeks. Because if they exceeded 60 hours in a calendar week, you need to be paying overtime on top of whatever that salary was. So at that point, is there any advantage to salary? Probably not, because it's going to make the calculations a lot harder keeping track of that. And you got to track the overtime anyway. That's what I think of best practice is generally pay hourly. For most people that, especially frontline employees, pay hourly because it's a whole lot easier to keep track of that than trying to do salary. Overtime coverage is then the third bullet point there. Immediate family members, including, and this is, I'm going to push that button there too because the lawsuit now comes into effect. So immediate family members of the farm owners are exempt from overtime. That includes owners of various entities like LLCs and so forth. And this small shareholders thing is where it gets really confusing. And I'll talk about the lawsuit here just in a moment, but the intent, and I was in a meeting with the attorneys from Department of Labor about this, their intent here with this whole small shareholder thing is that they don't want, okay, so I own a farm, I own 100% of it, and I have 3 employees, and I want to avoid having overtime, so I'm going to give each of my 3 employees 1% of the farm in order to get all these labor laws, right? They're going to say that's a sham, and they're not going to let you do that. That's what they're trying to drive at. But what about, I've got that same farm, and one of those 3 employees is really a star, and I'm getting the age I'm looking for transition, and I'm starting the transition process and brought that person in at 1% or 3% or 5%. Is that the same situation? Is that a sham? It's not. That's a real deal. That happens all the time in agriculture. That person needs to feel like an owner, right? Because that's the whole point of what we're doing. We're trying to get the Department of Labor to understand that and clarify what exactly do you mean by a small shareholder. That right there is part of what that lawsuit is about, actually, is trying to clarify those situations where small shareholders, it's unclear whether they are exempt or not exempt from overtime.
But if that small shareholder with family members notice. Correct.
Yes. Yeah, they were an immediate family member. Yeah. Now, and it does get to the other issue. Did I talk about that? It does get to the other issue of who's a family member. So the law right now says immediate bloodline family member. So that means if I'm the owner, it's my parents, my children. That's it. If you adopt, they'd be covered too because you're the parent of the person. But a niece or nephew, they're out. Which is different than most other laws. Most other laws go, I can't say the word, but it's a third degree of consanguinity, something like that. It's third degree of bloodline. There's a whole chart you can see on it, but it includes nieces and nephews and grandparents and stuff like that.
Children over 18.
For which?
As a laborer.
So if you're the farm owner and you have a child who's over
They're
18,
20 years old or something.
yeah, but they're your
Still a
child. Your child. Yes, they're exempt.
And so then they're attempting to get married and the spouse works.
Ha. The spouse of the child.
Then it's not, so they have to follow all the rules.
You know, that's a good question. I'm not 100% sure about that. Whether the spouses of the child, whether they're exempt or not.
Same immediate family.
Yeah, I think just to be safe right now, strictly speaking, I don't think they are because they're not immediate family. And then the last bullet down there. So most other industries, there's these other exemptions for executives, administrative professionals, people that are typically on salaries, right? So most of the managers and other types of businesses, if you're not a frontline worker, you're a manager, kind of a higher up. If you're in, people that work in banks and things like that, loan officers and stuff, they're typically not paid hourly. They're typically salaried professionals. And all those exemptions that other industries have, right now, agriculture has none of those. So in other words, you could be on a big farm, you could be a manager, a high-level manager that makes $70,000 a year and is paid salary. You're not exempt from overtime, which doesn't make any sense. But that's where it is right now. So that brings me to this lawsuit. What the lawsuit was the vegetable growers and the Northeast area producers brought the lawsuit. It is very narrow. It doesn't affect all your non-family, non-management employees. So all your frontline type workers out there, All these laws we're talking about are in effect today. They went into effect January 1. It's all in. The ones that are affected are those family members and those supervisors, managers, folks like that. They're right now, until January 24th, they're not under these laws. After that, they may be. We don't know what's going to happen on January 24th. There's supposed to be a hearing on that date. But that's what this temporary restraining order is all about. Yeah, so that can't be enforced. So that's just a key point. For most all employees, it's in effect now. But just those people that are uncertain right now, we'll see where it goes. So overtime best practices: pay hourly whenever you can. Track hours. Track hours, even for those that you might be paying on salary. I think it's a good idea to start doing that. And be prepared to document hours worked for everyone and amounts paid. Because that last bullet, some of the rules that are required. You as an employer, you have to keep true and accurate and contemporaneous time records of daily and weekly hours worked. So in other words, you can't wait till the end of the month and then write down everybody's hours where they worked the month prior. You need to keep timely records like daily and weekly as they work those hours, and not go. You can't go backward to track that. If you haven't, and if you've got some, more employees, more than just a handful of employees, look at some of the software and some of the new technology that's out there. Oh, it's not real expensive, but you can do a way better job of having people punch the clock. You've got software out there where you can use your cell phones and use that for punching the clock in and out. You don't necessarily have to have the old-fashioned punch clock and things like that. And then you've automatically got the records tracked right on the cell phone. And most of them have some other features included with it. So look at some of those things. There's some technology solutions you need to revisit, and that may help your life be a lot simpler and help you keep these records a lot better. Okay, let's go on to the day of rest requirement. So, as I said, there's a 24-hour consecutive day of rest in each and every calendar week that you designate. It is supposed to coincide whenever possible with the person's day of religious worship. So then the day can be moved if weather or crops demand it. So let's use an example there. So let's say you've got an apple operation, and most of your workforce Sunday is their day of rest, and so most days everybody gets that day off, and we don't do work, or we do minimal work on those days. But it's harvest time, we need to get this done, and we were supposed to be working on Wednesday, but it poured, right? So we couldn't get any work done. We can make that Wednesday now be our 24 hours consecutive day of rest, and then we can work on Sunday. So you can move it when weather or crop conditions or other work conditions require. That make sense? People ask how much lead time you need. Really doesn't need to be a whole lot of lead time. So it's that Wednesday morning, we expect to get to work, or we did work until 10 o'clock, but then we got rained out. Get everybody home at noon, and then we start the clock for 24 hours till noon on Thursday, then we can go back to work. Document that change, right? If it's ordinarily on Sundays, we need, and they don't tell us exactly how to document it. It could be as simple as making a note on your payroll records. It could be you just write a little note and insert it in your payroll records to make sure you're documenting somehow that Wednesday was the 24-hour consecutive day of rest. Employees cannot waive their day of rest. You can't get them to write in the work agreement or another document saying, I don't need a day of rest. I'm happy to work 24 hours, 7 days a week. They're not allowed to do that. If an employee, they can work voluntarily on their day of rest, but if an employee works on their day of rest, for every hour they work, they have to be paid time and a half. Okay? So this gets into all kinds of different permutations around that too, because people ask, okay, so if I can move the day of rest around, and I have somebody that works 7 days a week, can I just look back and pick whichever day was the shortest number of hours and have that be the day of rest? No, the day of rest is supposed to be, a fixed day unless there was a weather or other, business need that really made you move that day of rest. That's the other thing that people often think about. Well, any questions about this day of rest? Now, moves around.
So,
Yes.
help me understand, they can't waive their day of rest, but they can voluntarily work it?
Yes, because they're gonna get paid 1.5 times for every hour they work, right?
Whether they have their 60-hour limit or not, they get paid time and a half
On the day,
on the day of
if
rest.
they,
So
if they work that day. So
the farmer really doesn't want to pay him to work on the day of rest because it's going to cost him money.
So I'm just, Rich, I'm having a hard time of understanding, they have to take that 24 hours off. When you say waive it, you don't mean they
So-
swap it.
Some employees are just gonna, some employees are just rather not have that day. They'd rather be, I just want to work whenever you've got hours, pay me the regular rate. Labor won't allow that. Labor says that if they're gonna work on one of those days that they're working, they have to be paid 1.5 times.
But there has to be a good reason for them to work on it.
Well, from a management standpoint,
Yeah. So.
I'm not paying them.
Every day, good
But
day.
I mean, you said it's, that they have to honor that 24-hour period to get rest.
Yes.
They have to honor it, except when there's a continuing service.
No. They can voluntarily work. If they want to voluntarily, let's say somebody's a day of rest and you've got an employee that just wants to work every hour they want and you're willing to let them work that extra 6 hours on Sundays, it's fine. They can work it voluntarily. But you have to pay them 1.5 times for every hour worked. Okay. Now, okay, here's the other situation people ask about. Okay, so we got 60 hours overtime, we got day of rest. Both have a time and a half requirement. So I've got an employee, his day of rest normally is Sunday, Monday through Friday, he's worked 60 hours. He comes in and works 10 hours because we were busy. So he works 10 hours on Sunday. So now that's over 60. It's up to 70 hours, right? On both his day of rest and over 60. How much do I have to pay him? Is there double overtime? No, there's not. There's only one time. There's 1.5 times. That's it. There's no double jeopardy on the overtime for over 60 and day of rest.
Now, Rich, the day of rest, you said it can be moved if the weather crops demand it. But if an employee says, no, I want Sunday, that's the day of rest, he has to honor that day. Who has the final say on, yes, you're gonna work that day or not?
That's a good question. Everybody follow on that one? Who has the final say on? So, whenever they said, whenever possible, you want it to be on the person's day of religious assembly. But the reality is cows have to be milked. Cows have to be picked on, whatever. To my understanding, the employer does have the final say on whose day of rest is going to be what this day of day. We don't have a whole lot of experience with this yet, but that's what we're hearing is that the employer can designate that for employees.
Which one they use, that's when they'll file lawsuits.
Well, that's a good point too, because if a union actually gets in place and there's a contract from that labor union in place, that can potentially supersede a lot of these other things. I need to keep moving here because we're running out of time. Similar coverage on the day of rest, except for that second bullet where it introduced this idea of a foreman in charge. What's the foreman in charge? I mean, we can speculate about what it means, but I've really never heard that term used in agriculture. I've never seen it on any farms. But it apparently is used in some other industries. I think it's an old term. But there's some exemptions in the law for foreman in charge. Right now, that labor is interpreting that pretty broadly. And potentially it may mean that a lot of our supervisors will be exempt from this day of rest requirement. But that's one of those areas that needs to be sorted out a little bit.
So supervisor that's not a family member and that doesn't know chairs.
Correct. But they are still a foreman or foreperson in charge, yes. Potentially they'll be exempt from day of rest. To be clear, not from the 60-hour overtime requirement. This is specific only to day of rest.
Yeah, that is weird.
Yeah. You want to document this in the work agreement too. If you have someone that is a supervisor or something that you think would qualify as a foreman in charge, and they should be responsible for others, you know, this, you can't identify everybody on your farm as a foreman in charge. That's not going to fly. But if someone really is a supervisor or really is a manager that has a lot of responsibility, they could be a foreman in charge. Usually it's about supervising other people. All right. And that may change. The lawsuit's going to affect that too. Briefly, because we can't do much about this one, but there is a Farm Laborers Wage Board. That was part of the law, and this wage board is going to have somebody from Farm Bureau, somebody from AFL-CIO, which is a major labor union, and then a third person who will be the chair that the Commissioner of Labor will appoint. That wage board is supposed to meet, their first hearing is supposed to be before March 1. We have no idea who the third person is, but I guess we're going to name them pretty soon because they have to meet before March 1. And that board has to have a couple of hearings next year, and then they have to issue a report to the Commissioner and the Governor about their recommendations for what overtime and possibly other things will be going forward. So in other words, that overtime 60-hour threshold could change, could go lower after 2020, depending on what the wage board has to say about that. What we are hearing is that it's really important for employers to show up when those hearings happen, because the testimony of farmers, testimony of business owners about the impact apparently carries a lot of weight with these wage boards. There are other wage boards that operate. So it's a big wild card, but again, stay tuned to your industry organizations and make sure you turn out to support agriculture when that time comes. Union organizing, and I'll have to go a little bit fast here, but authorization, so yes, unions are specific to New York in this situation. It includes all farm laborers that would be eligible for unions. This is one of the areas that's kind of messy with this law, because potentially supervisors also could be in there. The lawsuit is potentially going to affect this as well. It affects all agricultural employers, including custom operators. So a lot of people didn't realize that, but if you're doing other things like custom operating, you're also under this union provision of law. We were surprised to learn that it wasn't the Department of Labor that's going to administer this. There's this whole other group called the Public Employers Relations Board, PERB, which will be the one that regulates unions in agriculture. So during the Labor Roadshow, we had PERB come out and got a chance to meet them and learn how they work a little bit, and we're actually very impressed with how reasonable and how interested in learning about agriculture they are. And so that was very much a bright spot in some of the things that we've been learning working with this board. But you know, their job is to mediate relationships between unions and employers. But that's all I'll say about that for right now. So farm laborers have the right to organize, to form, join, or assist labor organizations, and to collectively bargain. One thing that's a key point here is that even if 2 or 3 employees get together, even if they don't form a union and they decide to come to their employer and negotiate about their job as a group, that is collective bargaining, and that is protected under the law. So an employer cannot fire them because they came and asked for a higher wage, or they came and asked for whatever they asked for, because at that point they're collectively bargaining. So let's get into actual unions. So there may be groups trying to form unions on farms that may be happening now, we don't know. We did hear that the United Farm Workers actually has offices open in New York. That's the California Farm Worker Union. Union certification is a little bit strange under this law. Usually when we think about unions, we think about an election. There doesn't necessarily have to be an election under this law. This is more like, the law that we have to work with here is more like a public employer union than it is like a private sector union. So what that means is that union organizers simply need to get people to sign what are called dues authorization cards. I'm just going to flip ahead because that's an example of one there. A dues authorization card just says, hey, I'm interested in the union and you can collect dues from me to help pay for the union. And it has also the legal stuff over there. Some of the important things in that legal stuff, it says that you can't revoke this except for like a 10-day window once a year. So once they sign that card, they're kind of locked in, except for that 10-day window of time when they could revoke it. So your message as an employer to your employees, you know, they have the right to form a union if they want to, but don't let them be fooled into doing something that they may not want to do. They should understand what it is that they're signing. So that's the whole key I'm trying to say there. Make sure your employees aren't signing something that they don't understand what it is, because that, you know, it's easy to do that, and people sometimes just don't read things before they sign. Imagine that. Okay, and so if they get, if union organizers get 50% plus one of the employees to sign up and sign these cards, potentially at that point, they could get that union certified, and they do that by going to the firm and saying, either, or going to the employer directly and saying, hey, we've got 50+% of your employees want to join the union, will you recognize us? They could do that, and if you say yes, then you've got a union. Or they can go to the firm and say, hey, the same thing essentially, you know, petition and say, we've got this number, more than 50%, and we want to be recognized. That's how the process works. This is all new to me too, by the way. I've never been involved with any of these things directly, but this is what I've been hearing from others that have been involved with it and what the law says.
So there's no mind changing on that signature.
Well, I don't want to say that directly. I mean, they can't like a month later go back and say, I'd like to change. Basically next year, there's a 10-day window in there that they can change their mind.
So, okay. So it went below 51%, and next year, will the union still be recognized?
You know, that's the real challenge too, is that once a union is recognized and in place, it's very, very difficult for that to be reversed. It's not like there will be just a vote next year. There's a whole process as we go through to decertify a union, which is a very difficult process.
The same process that initiated can't be reversed.
No. Yeah. So it's, yeah, that's a challenge. Now this next part's really important for employers. So there's something, when you're dealing with unions, there's something called unfair labor practices. And there were some agreements within this particular law that we have. So employers can't lock out workers, which I can't imagine a farmer locking out workers. Can't refuse to continue an expired agreement that's already in place, and can't discourage union organization. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But farm employees then, as a compromise, they can't strike. So that was right there. That's kind of the agreement. So if, you know, if you're trying to get cow's milk, you're trying to get apples harvested, you have to strike. You're kind of over the barrel at that point. So for farmers, you need to remember two things for employers. Tips, you can't threaten employees. You can't say, I'm going to fire you, I'm going to close the business, I'm going to, you know, cut off your benefits or whatever. You can't threaten employees and say, you know, if you guys sign up for the union, I'm quitting. I'm selling the farm and stuff like that. You can't interrogate. So, you know, you can't pull that employee into your office and say, hey, tell me about this union thing. Who's interested in it? You know, trying to get information that way. That's an unfair labor practice. You can't promise. You can't be like, hey, I'm going to take care of everybody. You're all going to get $1 raise if we keep the union out of here. That's making promises that, you know, is called an unfair labor practice, and there's penalties for that. If you get caught doing any of these things and the union can prove it, they can get the union certified instantly without any election, even without having cards necessarily signed to do that. And the last one is S is for surveillance. So you can't be spying on people. You can't be following to the union meeting and taking pictures of their license plates or putting up cameras in order to you know, surveil employees and figure out what's going on that way. So tips are the things you need to remember that you can't do as an employer. It still is the United States, and you still have First Amendment rights. So there are things that you can say, and that's what I want to get to next. F is for facts. So you remember FOE, F-O-E. F is for facts. Employers can share factual information like, you know, there will be dues that have to be collected that'll have to come out of your paycheck that go into heads of the union. That is fact. They can talk about real things like, or you can share opinions. That's another good one. So you can say, you know, if you're in favor and you want to have a union on your farm, you can say that. That's your opinion. Or you can say things like, I don't think it would be the best thing for our farm, and I don't want to have a union here. But what Herb has told us is that this piece in here is really important. I'm not in favor of a union, and I don't think it's the best thing for our business, but I will respect the law. In that case, because I could say, you know, in a real threatening way, Bruce, I'm not in favor of a union. And you can see that more of as a threatening way, right? Or it could be, I'm not in favor of you. You know, see what I'm saying? So it could be a threat or not a threat. But if I add on there that I will respect employees' choice and I'll respect the law, then you're most likely going to be in this area of opinion and not threat.
It's really weird, the fact that if you're a farmer and you like 3 people, they join a state union, are they gonna send a negotiator to come and sit down with the farmer and fight for 3 employees to get $1 more an hour or 50 cents more an hour? That just doesn't seem like that's gonna happen. It might happen on a farm where there's 100 employees or 50, but these small farms, they can't. It wouldn't be worth the union's time of coming down to negotiate.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's a risk every farmer's got to sort out for themselves,
And
right?
they can't strike, right?
Correct.
So
Employees can't strike.
they have no power over the farmer. Farmer says the person negotiating, no.
Well, you have to negotiate in good faith.
Yeah, but you're asking for a $5 raise. I'm saying, no, I'm not giving you a $5 raise.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So the first part of what you said there, though, I think the bigger the farm, the bigger the target, for sure. I think if you're a small farm, 2 things. If you're small and you got good relationships with your employees, the risk is going to be way low, way low. If you're big and you got problem relationships with employees, then that's the one that's really going to be a target.
They're not taking into consideration other things farmers do for their employees. Give them milk, half a beef cow, and so they're getting all kinds of things that aren't ethical.
Mhm.
In the format, they're gonna pull union stuff on me, you want milk, pay for it, you want half the beef, pay for it.
And those things can all be part of the negotiation for sure. But yet you raise a good point though. In most cases, if a union formed, let's say it was the United Farm Workers, there would be an outside person that would come into the farm, talk to the employees, negotiate on their behalf with the farm owner, and it would be kind of a back and forth there. And it really will change the relationship between the employees and the owner. Is it going to happen on a small farm? I really doubt. Is it going to happen on some big farms? I almost guarantee that there's going to be some big farms because UFW and other organizations are not going to stop until they get at least one farm in New York union. I'm sure of that. So, you know, we're trying to help farms to be prepared as much as possible. The last FO is examples. You can give specific examples, you know, if there's a labor contract or if you've been involved in a union or if you've had a family member or friend that have been involved in another union, you can share examples that were positive or negative about those experiences if you've got actual factual examples that you can share. Housing inspections, again, I'll skip over those because we've got another year on that. But it's, if anybody have H2A workers in here? No. Anybody have migrant workers at all? Seasonal? No? Okay. No, it's not really a worry for you. So we'll just skip that. A couple of other resources that are available there. Becker Foreman is on Monday, where we'll get into a lot of these things in a lot more detail. This is where a lot of the larger vegetable and apple growers go, so we'll have some good discussion about that in Syracuse next week. I think, you know, print this recently, you've got it printed already, so you can use it as kind of an action guide for you. Get those insurances in place for sure. Everybody, even the very smallest farm, you know, that insurance is required. Make a plan for overtime because everybody's affected by that. For the most part, if you've got any non-family employees, make sure you're getting that day of rest and designating what that day of rest is for folks and make sure everybody takes it. You know, you gotta pay 1.5 hours 1.5 times the regular rate if they do work that day of rest. Update your posters. That's another thing. There's a lot of change in those posters for this year, so make sure you do that. And then just plug into your other information sources, try to stay on top of this stuff as much as possible, and print things out, and make sure that you're in compliance as much as you can. So, questions? I know that's a lot.